Hello and welcome to this next episode of the Human Paradox Podcast, H+. This week we're going to be discussing an interesting topic known as CRISPR, and our friend Colin here is going to give us an introduction. He's one of our speakers. Along with us here is Paul as well, and my name is Paul, so hope there's no confusion there.
So we've got two Pauls and Colin.
Two Pauls and Colin.
I'm Colin. So we're going to go over real quick why this is in the news and what all this about is kind of about. So unless you were living under a rock over Thanksgiving weekend, you probably saw the announcement from a Chinese scientist that he actually successfully edited the genome of two people, that point previously unborn embryos, and supposedly they have now developed into healthy human beings. And the way that he went about editing this was using a bacterial, previously known as bacterial autoimmune system. It's called CRISPR, and it stands for clustered regular interspaced palindromic repeats. Ultimately, the way that this works is bacteria, they get invaded by viruses which inject their DNA into them. So they develop these proteins that pick up the viral DNA and then can incorporate it into their genome. There's a little more to it than that as far as the immunity goes, but for our purposes, we basically are just using this protein to grab DNA and insert it into a genome. Now, one thing that it also does is it can delete genes. And in this case, what he did was deleted a gene that acts as a receptor for the HIV virus. And so these two children were born from fathers that had HIV, and they used in vitro fertilization. So they basically fertilized the egg with the father's sperm outside of the uterus, and then edited them to delete the CCR5 gene, which is what the HIV virus attaches to, and that's what lets it get inside the cell. So after that, the babies supposedly were born healthy. They don't have HIV, and they are now apparently immune to HIV. So that's kind of the gist of this basic genome editing. Now, the idea of CRISPR in general is that we could use this to do just about anything that we wanted to do as far as editing the genome.
So in this circumstance, first of all, thank you. That's a great explanation of this whole topic. Now, I think it's really important to kind of look at this from a couple of perspectives. First and foremost is what this scientist doing necessarily a bad thing? Because, I mean, you're eliminating the possibility of someone being affected by the HIV virus. So technically, isn't that a stepping stone towards a cure, or basically a prevention across the board as far as genetics goes? Because once these children grow up and if everything turns out healthy, they'll be able to produce offspring as well. And theoretically, they'd pass on this immunization, correct?
Well, actually, one of the problems with deleting the CCR5 gene, because not everyone has this CCR5 gene, so there are people that have natural immunity to HIV.
Mm-hmm.
But those people also have increased susceptibility to West Nile virus.
Okay.
So it's just a difficult thing to document the downstream effects. And then as far as passing it on, it just depends who they have a kid with. You only get half your parents' genes, kind of. So,
very true. Yeah.
To me, the biggest moral issue here is that he knowingly started doing IVF with fathers that had HIV. I mean, that's essentially the very beginning of the moral issues. And then the rest of them are, you start in the consent and you can walk all the way down to, should humans be trying to play God?
Yeah, I'd like to know exactly what the goal is here, because I don't know if you guys watched the promotional, but he states the goal is to susceptibility disease, shouldn't eugenics, but I mean, there's obvious implications where other people have different goals. So
right, I think there's the double-edged sword on this whole situation is that on one hand, you might have a scientist who has good intentions in using this technology to benefit the human race. However, the fact that this technology exists itself is kind of its own downfall, because it's only a matter of time before you actually see it used for morally questionable purposes.
Well, the other thing to consider too is, as far as, like Paul, you mentioned eugenics, that's a whole debate in and of itself. Like, is that eugenics? Is modifying our DNA altering kind of the nature of ourselves? And is that ethical?
Right. So let me ask you a question. What exactly is your difference?
What's that?
What would you?
You're cutting out. Could you repeat it?
So what would you say that?
You keep
cutting off.
Is that better?
A little bit.
Yeah. So like, how would we define broad?
I think it really depends on how we look at it, because
no, just give me like a one liner.
Okay. Yeah, no, I would say it's
Hold on. Can you really do that? Because there's eugenics in the idea that some genes are superior to others, which is true. And then there's eugenics in the context of let's eliminate the bad genes.
Okay, so like without any like goal, just like in the sense that it's a verb.
I would say eugenics is curation of genetics.
Okay, so like you can have eugenics just in like the way people select like without
right.
Okay.
I think that's more
I'm not
natural.
sure I agree with that.
Okay.
Because are people really selecting for genes? They're
selecting for
phenotypes. It's a little different.
Okay.
So,
all right.
If you see someone that you're attracted to, you're not necessarily, when you have a child with them, you're not necessarily selecting for their genes so much as you are kind of just becoming a product of your own. But the way that I think of eugenics generally is there's two aspects of it. One is, yes, you want good genes, and the other is you also want to actively get rid of the bad genes. And that's the problematic part of eugenics. Otherwise, it's more of, I would just say, genetic selection.
Right. As a more natural process in terms of evolution or reproduction.
So I think, when people talk about the eugenics impact of something like CRISPR, the ultimate, like if you carry this train of thought all the way to the very logical end, is that as far as eugenics and CRISPR are concerned, you could have some, authoritarian government mandating the deletion of genes in the populace that they don't like.
Well, yeah, and we will get to it later on. I think there's another question. It didn't really specify like what like every process took to do this experiment, but I guess the question, does the means justify the end? There's a possibility could have done abortion, IVF, so it's like,
well, a couple years ago, there was actually a lot of embryos that they tried to, some more scientists in China, different scientists, tried to edit. I forget what the edits they were trying to make were, but it was really more supposed to be a study of the fidelity of this CRISPR system. And they actually, they took something like 16 embryos, fertilized embryos, and made edits to them. And then they aborted the embryos. So this isn't the first time it's been done in public. And there was a lot of outcry about that. Supposedly what they were doing was actually illegal. Just like this guy, China now is saying it was illegal. But who knows with China? So
yeah, I'd actually read that as well. So it's not apparent what he's legal or if the government.
It's possible that they did, and then it's like a wink and a nod kind of deal when the bad press rolls in. But I think starting from the most basic bioethical question and working our way up, is testing on human beings ethical?
Well, it's beyond testing now. We're actually doing it.
Well, I mean, they are. I guess if it went wrong, it would be considered a test.
Right.
But let me pose it to you guys, like just yes or no. Do you think that there's a situation where CRISPR is ever going to be moral?
No, I don't think so. And that's because I think you talked a little bit about that earlier in terms of the consent of the person, because this isn't a situation where you have someone who's suffering from HIV and saying, oh, you could do this genetic thing to me to alter things. But at this point here, it's you're talking about an embryo that's being edited beyond their consent. And
all right, Paul, what do you think? Yes or no? Could this ever be used morally?
No, I'm going to agree with Paul on this. Just based on the motive, it's not saving dire. What is the goal? It's prove. It's not exactly treatment, modification
of an otherwise healthy embryo.
Yeah. So there's really no there's no like primary moral principle.
All right, so let's modify the question then, and we'll just conveniently ignore realistic limitations for a second here for the thought exercise. If there was a way to do this without testing it on human beings, would that change your opinion at all?
Well, what do you mean exactly? Because are you just talking about like exclusively using this on animals, or?
No, what I'm saying is if there was a way to develop this technology without having to test it, basically just a guarantee that it would work successfully.
No, that wouldn't change my attitude on it at all, because you're talking about a slippery slope of technology where even one good intention or benefit, it's opening a door for this technology to be used in a whole different way as well.
So the idea then is that there's more ethical problems to this than just the basic bioethical question of human testing.
Absolutely.
Paul, what do you think? Would that change your opinion on it?
No. I mean, I guess there is the potential maybe if it could be used in a way to save lives, if that were the goal. But again, there's that slippery. Really, what I want to get at is what is the goal of streamlining?
Well, it seems like exactly, because it's a good intention. Sorry.
Well, is it really
delete the autism gene?
Because
Well, no,
Yeah, delete
it
the
seems
autism
like
thing.
it might be a good intention, but in the wrong hands, you're gonna. I mean, we've already seen this before. You currently have sex selective abortions going on now.
Mm.
That's not even inside the whole CRISPR conversation. But the moment that we get there, I mean, who's gonna say these governments or corporations are going to just abide by a code of moral ethics? It's
Yeah,
a
well,
really, really
that's a good
dangerous
point,
slope.
Paul, when you bring up code of ethics, because the way these corporations, well, they don't view people, they view them at
Right.
you just modify parts and new parts, put the other better parts. It's
Right.
viewing humans as in a mechanistic way where experimentation. My position, man's essence is not a machine, spiritual. No matter how many parts you can't actually.
Well, so that's there's a few things to unpack there. The first thing that kind of leaps to my mind is I think it's possible to distinguish. I think it's possible to draw a distinction between medicine and unethical uses of medical technology. So like, just because the Nazis experimented on all those people doesn't mean that we abandon surgery as a field. So it's certainly possible to curate medical technology in a way that pretty much aligns it solely for good purposes, healing people. So I don't think that I don't really buy the slippery slope argument of people will use this to do bad things, because people can use anything to do bad things, right? Like we
Right.
generally
No, I
react
get
on
that.
other things.
That actually came to my mind when we were mentioning, like, this is kind of the same argument. Gun control, it's a slippery slope once guns, guns start killing people. Like, we know that's not true. Okay.
Now, my issue with this, if we're going to go examine this slope, is it's kind of like a nuclear bomb to me, because once you get this technology, this is kind of just the end all be all of biological technology, right? You could engineer anything, and yeah, it's going to take a while to get there, but we'll get there. And so it just seems logical that people will try to use this for destructive purposes, and that's a whole other moral issue. Like, could we engineer subservient, robotic human beings with essentially no autonomy that are just killing machines? And I completely believe that that's going to happen with this technology. And so then the question is, for me, is the rest of the technology worth that risk, or almost that inevitability?
Well, it's too late. The genie's out of the bottle.
I mean, it is and it isn't. I don't think. Yeah, I agree. I don't think it'd be a very practical thing to try and regulate. It's too easy to do. It's not exactly. I mean, it's not easy, but like, you don't need to enrich uranium with massive centrifuges for this one.
Right.
You can do it in a 10 by 10 lab.
I think that brings up an important question. How this is being done in China, and this is the first that but does that really matter? Because we know there's plenty of institutions or groups of people that would want to without people, and it would be to their great advantage. Let's say a certain country were able to, before other countries' knowledge, prove their
which leads to an arms race.
Exactly. So sort of the element of surprise by improving gene pool is huge.
Oh, absolutely. And then it's kind of like, well, even if you're ethically or morally against this, what choice do you have?
Right.
That's
you're gonna let the other guy win?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You're a chump if you don't. It's kind of that whole tragedy of the commons. Like, if you just let other people take advantage of it and you don't take advantage, well, yeah, maybe you're doing an altruistic thing, but then you're going to be eliminated from the conversation.
Right. Yeah, but I think that's the really big question is, once this technology takes off, because this is, in vitro, so you're talking about outside of the womb in a petri dish, basically. But when the technology gets there, is this going to be something as simple as someone's pregnant and you go in there and you're able to perform this quick nanotechnology surgery that alters a few genes and then you're off and give a child naturally? Like, it's the realm of science fiction. Right, it's the realm of science fiction, but when you look at it from that perspective and you're talking about like an arms race, you could have countries able to alter their citizens based off of this technology, able to produce either the genetically superior individual.
Put a kill switch in.
Right.
Not to go completely tinfoil hat. See, my worry is something along the lines of, like, let's say China, who already has a huge population advantage on us, starts engineering their citizens to be super intelligent. Well, now you've got, however many billion Chinese people. They're already, if you take like the top 1% intelligence wise in China, it's an order of magnitude larger than the top 1% in America.
And that's
So
the thing. It
then,
doesn't necessarily have to be a military thing. It could be economic. Just doing that in
Yeah.
itself, and
Well,
it could turn the
yeah,
tables in terms of their scientific discovery. No,
I would,
it's
the whole 20th century has been a great example of how economic is a type of. I
Yeah.
would say that's accurate. And I don't know if you guys noticed in the article that we all read. I think it mentioned that the Chinese population is not. They don't typically have what a caste now, so that wouldn't really make sense for them for the purpose of removing susceptibility. That's
no,
kind
it's
of how
probably
it's like.
something that he did as
oh, you mean
because
the
he could
CCR5
do it,
gene?
right?
Yeah, the TCR5.
Yes, they don't have it, so why bother? Like,
Right.
it's
So,
yeah, I think it was
the
just
only
more of a proof of
other.
concept.
Right, just to show it
Yeah,
off.
but I mean, the other implication, obviously.
Yeah, I mean the ultimate goal. Anyone that thinks this isn't about directed evolution is fooling themselves. That is the ultimate goal of all biology and medicine is directed evolution.
Because that's the thing too, is that even in an arms race situation, you have one country who gets there first in terms of this technology. They could hold the world hostage to the science themselves. If you want to have your children preserved from this biochemical agent that we could deploy against you, you're going to have to submit, or you're going to have to buy it from us, and you're going to have a whole new case system come out in the social sphere. It's crazy.
That may not work on a national scale, but it could certainly work on a terroristic scale. All it takes is one guy to start doing IVF with his cult that has some kind of deleted receptor for some other kind of neurotoxin.
Yeah.
And then they're all immune to the neurotoxin. And
I got a new Tom Clancy novel right there. Dang.
Yeah, it'd be a long Tom Clancy novel, 20 years worth, but
yeah.
All right, so before we wrap up this ethical question, I'd like to make a point on proponents of this say, I don't know if proponents, but a lot of people researching and editing happening elsewhere. If it's not happening in China, it's happening in the US. Most definitely.
Yeah, DARPA most certainly.
Right. So they say, well, it's happening already. So we have no choice but to act fast and start doing it ourselves. I don't know. I don't agree with that. Because to me, that's just it's the essence of the Faustian man sells his soul to the devil, and it'll come back to bite him. It'll become something that he can't control.
Yeah. So that's the kind of time-old question of: is it better to be wrong and win, or to be right and lose? Because it does seem like sometimes the right thing, the right choice, is the losing option. And this is one of the, it's the same with nuclear weapons, and even more the case with this. I don't know the answer to that.
No, and you start regulating something like this so severely, it's just going to go underground in terms of the really ethically questionable stuff.
Yeah, this would be.
I mean, it's already underground as it is, but
yeah. So I guess we should move on to the cultural of this.
Well, especially with this taking place in China, and they have the social point system that's slowly being experimented with. I mean, we're talking about the idea that you're going to have a whole new social sphere evolve from this, of people who can access and afford the technology to have their genes altered. Because I mean, it's the scientific stereotypical term like the designer baby, but you get into a point now where the governments, especially with the whole push for universal health care and coverage from government entities, you're going to reach a point where the state can authorize who or who cannot have their genes altered and ultimately become the selector. They're going to pick.
Let's think about that. What's the point of this social construct or social score system?
Right.
Like, what are they trying to achieve? Is it a outcome-based thing? Are they just trying to incentivize better behavior out of people? Or are they trying to create a social caste?
Mm-hmm.
Because it certainly seems like if they're trying to create a social caste, that's a phenomenally effective way to do it. Because once you start to get screwed up in this system, there's no getting out. There's no climbing out. And I was shocked.
And it's a psychological thing. I was reading about how a lot of these Asian countries have very unique perspectives on honor, and how they could use a social point system like this as a means to kind of keep the sheep in line, so to speak, by worrying about whether or not you're going to be viewed publicly or have public access to certain things. So it defines the behavior. I mean, you talk about how taxing something will alter a person's behavior in their shopping. This is just another example of that. You're going to alter behavior by doing this.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. In Chinese culture, they're not encumbered with Judeo-Christian morality. So,
right.
A lot of people would view them as not having a problem with transhuman. But
right.
I don't know that that's true, because in the article that we read, they actually had a link to a poll that showed pretty much the same percentage of approval rating. It's about like 20% of the population in both China and the US. I think the US was 23% higher than China. So I don't know if that's true, but that's besides the point, because who's doing this? It's going to be the government or corporation who are in bed with the government. It doesn't
Right.
really matter.
Well, let me
the
ask you
approval
this.
rating stuff.
If you're against this, say maybe you're not the kind of like religious fundamentalist against this. Maybe you're just against this because you think generally it's not a great idea. And I go to you and I say, we've got a 100% chance of success on doing this to your kid that will make him twice as smart as the average citizen. He'll probably be twice as successful, if not more, in life. And if you don't do it, he's going to be disadvantaged because everybody else around you and your social group is also doing it. Are you going to say yes or no? I think a lot of people are going to say yes. And so then you can use this to essentially turn your social caste into a biological caste, right? Where only the people in the good graces are allowed this technology, and the rest of the people just continually dig themselves deeper and deeper into a hole of squalor.
Well, eventually, I mean, you're going to reach a point where why are you going to even have that whole caste exist if you are so focused on having a caste of the genetically engineered?
Well,
and
because
you reach a point where you're talking potential genocide. Like, why have them exist? If you go,
crap.
yeah.
That's the whole point of a caste system. It's the basic problem of authoritarian governments. You need people to do the dirty work that aren't going to complain about it or have no other choice, right?
Right.
The Gulag system in Soviet Russia, the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, those are the underpinnings of the labor force in those types of systems. It's why we're constantly concerned about the erosion of the middle class here, because the middle class is this amazing new technology that we just developed a couple hundred years ago that has never been seen before.
I was actually just looking at a map of the world, some laws. Looks like Canada, Mexico, and a lot of Europe and have on gene editing, but Russia it's fairly ambiguous. They really have my laws. Maybe that leads to how they don't really have a very bioengineering.
Well, I would kind of posit that I'm sure Australia has a ban on large amounts of explosives, but that probably doesn't stop them from researching it in secret.
Oh yeah, agreed. And restrictive in the United States, we all know, advantageous.
Yeah, I'm sure the DoD has a setup somewhere. I doubt they would let this opportunity go by. And can they really be faulted for it too? I doubt it. When you're thinking about national security perspective, you just can't afford to fall behind the technology curve like this, especially one that takes so long to pay off. Talking about you have to raise a child.
Right.
If you get 5 years behind, you can't make that up with just extra effort.
Yeah,
and it still takes time to grow.
So I think you mentioned you had read some Nick Bostrom. I was reading a study by Shulman and Bostrom. Basically, they said that this could result in per generation and an eventual hundreds
And that's not. Was that factoring in this kind of exponential idea where like each generation will get better at doing this?
No, it wasn't. So go figure.
That's pretty. If there's
insane.
If that's even remotely accurate, that's just a terrifying. Just to raise the IQ 1 or 2 points across the board would be an absolutely astronomical achievement of society. We dream about that, let alone that much per generation.
I've heard rumors that the ancient higher IQ one had today, but this is surpassed.
Yeah, you have to assume it'll just snowball, well each generation.
Each generation gets, yeah.
Imagine if like your standard PhD was an Einstein level of intelligence, even if it's not the whole population. Just think about what just a handful of guys, Linus Pauling, Niels Bohr, Albert Einstein, maybe 20, 30 people that we really remember as having, revolutionized science. Well, imagine if we could have 1,000 Einsteins working in the same industry at the same time. That would just be absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Part of me is like
massive strategic. Anyone who keeps it under wraps, they're not even going to have to do.
Yeah. Imagine what we could do in terms of, to kind of switch focus from negative, but in terms of working on good things, imagine what we could do for renewable energy and just solving basic medical issues, or that intelligence alone would be a huge increase of the quality of life for everyone in the world, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, it's that double-edged sword. There are so many benefits, but at the same time, at what cost?
Yeah, the negative externalities definitely need to be investigated. But it keeps coming to me. It keeps boiling down to this idea: like, can we really stop it? I don't think we could. So you might as well take advantage of it to the best that we can, right? Because if we get too far behind on this, then it's all over.
So So if we admit that this is an unstoppable tackle, the implication go where this could go south, because there's a lot of high level technology. Let's just say our eschatology. What's the end game here?
Right. I mean, and you can go down 1,000 different roads with that. What was the name of that program that Elon Musk was just discussing about connecting human minds to data? I forget the name of that. But it was the whole concept of like this own broadband network where humans would be able to tap into for information, and it's just
Right.
it seems almost science fiction, but at the same time we're talking about this technology and this editing right on the horizon there. I mean, you have this coupled
Neuralink.
with that Neuralink. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
So
It's
that kinda taps
insane. Yeah.
into-
That's Elon Musk, though. I mean, he
No,
made
I
those
know.
comments like,
I
2
know.
seconds
It's-
before he took a hit of a joint.
It's not
Joe
just
Rogan.
Elon Musk, because there's a number of startups that are doing the Neuralink thing. Is a lot of people on the cutting edge, the startup in whole brain, and that's what could really accelerate
Whole brain emulation.
Whole brain emulation. I guess the idea is there's untold quintillion of emulated human minds running trillions of times faster than biological.
I don't know that I believe that.
Yeah, I hope not. I mean, once you get out of your head, so to speak, things get out of control.
Well, I think part of the problem that you would run into there is that the way that the human mind is kind of bootstrapped and built up off these subroutines. I mean, I don't know too much about neurobiology, but I know enough to know that it's not brains don't operate even remotely similar to computers. And so unless you had a really good understanding of the neurological shortcuts that we take, which we don't, it would be really tough to emulate a brain in a computer. So that sounds kind of more, to my initial reactions, that is just, that sounds a little
far-fetched.
markety.
I'd hope so. I mean, there's a study by Sandberg 2014 hints that whole brain by that. Let's hope not. Use Monte Carlo's incredibly accurate.
Yeah, another concerning thing about that problem too is like this whole idea of access. And I wanted to get to this as far as CRISPR goes as well, because I think it applies, and we haven't touched on it yet. How do we ensure, as we keep coming up with these things that basically just they give you a biological advantage, how do we ensure that there's an equal distribution across all of the social classes for this kind of technology? Because one way that this whole situation could go really south is if only rich people get this, right? And I'm not talking like, upper middle class. I'm talking like the kind of guys that are already multi-billionaires and then get upset when they lose, tiny margins on profits that they don't need.
Well, I think the problem right now is evident, being developed by big biotech, or at least small ones that are funded by big. It's going to be a for-profit.
Yeah, it absolutely will be a for-profit thing.
Well, that's how it's going to grow. Yeah.
And then like there's this, usually the way that works is like, okay, the early adopters pave the way in terms of price, and then the patent expires after 20 years, and you get your generic that comes out, and then it's kind of
generic baby.
But like this is a situation where it's we're not talking about a new type of cholesterol inhibitor. The implications are a little bigger. There's a huge competitive advantage to be had in that patent window, and if that advantage is consolidated, it may never leave that patent window. I'm just worried about like what happens if the only people that can get their hands on for say 10 years or so are like the guys who are like, I want to have all the, and I want to own all the all the land. Like that's not a great scenario. I think you just end up with a greater cultural and social divide between this whole idea of like the rich people versus 99%.
Yeah, it's almost like if that happened, we could see a bigger divide, the middle class.
And I'm typically where I fall in these kinds of issues is it's like, well, we have equality of opportunity. And yeah, maybe having money makes things easier, but yeah, I've always firmly believed that anyone, if they work hard enough, will be able to secure a future. But it's like, if we radically alter reality, if we radically alter biology, which in my opinion is reality, that doesn't necessarily hold up anymore. And I think that you can make a good case for socialism under that kind of context.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. Yeah, it would become a biological monopoly. So yeah, regulation are definitely.
Never thought I'd be advocating socialism. I've kind of wondered, like, these paradigms that we were so comfortable with at this point, when we're all replaced by robots and we're editing genes and that kind of stuff, and there's really not much point to lower classes anymore, it's going to become like a survival game. And it really boils down to whether or not you just believe humans have intrinsic value or not.
Right. Which is why we stop looking at human.
Well, that's a bleak view of the future.
I mean, it's coming though, right? It's no one can resist this temptation of like, oh, we'll never have to do any work.
No.
Yeah, that's what do they call that? It's the post scarcity.
Yeah,
When
post scarcity.
all your needs are met.
So then, what's the point of living, right? Like, where do you get your fulfillment?
Right, but then that's not the only problem. Where do you get because there's a survival, right? AI is going to take over, and I think this CRISPR is going to play into that.
Oh, absolutely.
Improving the gene is going to improve biosingularity. So this is kind of a Deus Ex type thing. We're streamlining, becoming the Uberman, so it's scary to think what that might be. But eventually, we're going to come up with AI sentient. One
idea is, we could theoretically control. If we could theoretically engineer a gene that could control or interface with computers or AIs in some way, and then just wipe out the rest of the brain and just let it be run kind of by a mainframe somewhere else with a giant antenna sticking out of their neck. So there was a couple months ago, a group out of California. I think it was California Institute of Technology. They released a paper talking about these composable protein circuits, and just the idea was they use these proteins from viruses, and they just came up with ways to unify an input and output to circuits of these proteins. So I think they had like 3 or 4, and the proteins could regulate each other. And you either, depending on whatever the input is, you'd have to engineer that to be specific. These proteins could basically perform some logic. So they could do, if, and, or, nor, a whole bunch of logic gates. So, if we put these on a single transcript and use CRISPR to inject them directly into an embryo, then you've got a system capable of performing computations inside of a human cell. And this isn't, both these technologies already exist. No one's put them together, but they're both in existence right now. So this isn't some far-fetched thing.
So what's the next step after this approach? What's the end?
So I think the end goal of the proteins thing would be like, all right, you get this transcript that detects increase of certain oncogenic cancer-causing genes, right? So then when you're 55 and your prostate starts to multiply, all of a sudden this transcript will detect it, activate proteins that will then kill the cancerous cells, right? Like the idea, it's kind of the holy grail of biology and medicine. Like you could solve just about any medical, between CRISPR and this system, you could solve any medical issue at all as it happens.
But we all know it's not just.
Well, I mean, I think the end result is eternal life, avoidance of death, anyways. Reversal of aging,
power over.
Yeah, I mean, you could employ this in so many different ways. It's kind of limitless. It's going to take a while to build up, but we're talking about a Turing complete language that can interface with cells that we now have the technology to inject.
I don't know if you guys have heard of the Flynn effect, Colin.
The Flynn effect?
Yeah.
It sounds familiar. Was that? No, I'm thinking of the wrong thing. Does that have to do with IQ?
Yeah, it does actually. I guess it's sort of like an exponent of IQ, but what we're seeing now is
it's like Moore's law, kind of.
Yeah, so in a lot of like very developed countries, IQs actually, so that presents a problem where CRISPR could, but being in the Chinese or where they're courting a lot of Africa for their reseurces.
Yeah, I've heard of that. They go in there and build roads and get all their oil or whatever they have. Coffee.
They
bananas.
Give them plenty of jobs, developing the fit. I don't know that coerce the African government.
I mean, I think one thing that we have to point out is China is a country that right now has concentration camps full of gay people and Muslims. This isn't something I guess talked about a lot, but they've shown themselves willing to experiment on human beings, to completely disregard all of life, colonize other nations. These aren't exclusively Chinese ideas, but
no, but they're less demanding really doing it when it comes to respecting Africa. They don't give
they don't care.
They don't. Yeah, officials don't ask for.
All right, so now we want to get to the last point, kind of the big one for me. How is CRISPR gene editing going to shape the future of biology? Because basically every social construct that we have, it seems, is biologically limited. And in my mind, that establishes biology kind of as this ultimate truth. You can't argue with it. But if we start editing it, we start changing it, is biology going to eventually become a social construct?
I think we are very close to that point because the longest time, like you were saying, biology was kind of seen as this truth, as observable but not changeable. We work within the realm of physics, we work within the rules and laws of science, and now we're at the point where we're able to alter those to our own beck and will, so to speak. So
Right. If
I don't know,
we're
it's-
stuck inside physics, but then biology is kind of this application of it.
Right.
And so
No,
now
this-
we can change the application.
Pretty much, we're allowed to rewrite our own universe at this point here, because if you're no longer limited by the constraints of biology, I mean, it's more than playing God. You are becoming a god.
Well, this introduces a Foster.
Mm-hmm.
All right, yeah, we have control over biology, but if you're granting complete control to technology, you're also giving there's a price, and that could loss of.
Yeah. So I think you could argue that disorder will increase for sure. More options, more degrees of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be
Yeah.
more chaos. That's kind of just the natural inclination of everything. So yeah, that could be a counter-evolutionary point, right? This could make evolution less directed.
Yeah, and that plays into the idea of technological AI. It's developing, and there's a big buzz about deep. But at some point, some event it trigger an exponential. We don't have control over it, and it just starts developing at a crazy rate.
Well, I mean, there's always going to be a thermodynamic control. So as far as that goes, I'm not worried. Yeah, we'll just unplug them.
Yeah, you say that.
Have you heard of the theory that there are advanced alien civilizations out there, but they're actually waiting to
Yes,
start
I
space
have.
travel
I
because
was
they're
actually
waiting for
reading
the
this
temperatures to
today.
cool enough?
I was reading about this today.
You were? So was I. That's kind of weird.
What is it?
So there's this idea that there's alien civilizations out there that are waiting for the temperature of the universe to cool so that they can run the computing power that they would need to become super advanced and travel at insane speeds and all sorts of stuff. Because
Right.
all that computing power would just be too hot to feasibly ever cool or be cooled and actually work within physical parameters. So they need the temperature of the universe to go down so that the baseline is lower where they're starting from and they can handle the heat increase.
That is fascinating.
Because
Right,
the idea is that the computing power you would need to do all this advanced alien civilization
Yeah,
stuff.
no, I get
like
that. Yeah, it's just
faster than light travel and anal probing.
need a water cooler.
Yeah, you'd need insane amounts of cooling that just aren't physically feasible on a planetary scale.
Yeah, and there's also the hypothesis of monitoring our development towards this technological singularity, a singular AI that has control of annihilate past the civilizing, getting past.
Yeah, the AI problem is an interesting thing because it's like once we have the first one, we can just tell it to make more better ones, and it'll do it way better than we ever can. And then those new ones will be even better. And so it'll be physically limited basically by can we give it enough energy and computing power? And if we can, the options are kind of endless there. It'll just keep improving so incredibly fast. But I mean, I think those energy and power limitations they're not going anywhere.
Well, anything else to discuss in relation to this?
I hear beer glasses,
those are actually.
coffee mugs full of beer.
I'm disappointed, son.
All right, we should probably do an outro.
Shut up.
All right, you know what? This works fine for the outro, actually. I'll just leave this in from where Paul started humming into the microphone. And, commence cool EDM techno music here. And thank you.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time.
All right.
Someone awkwardly say cheers, please.
Cheers.